Hi everybody, this is Redman of 3D World. Welcome to this Q&A video. In this video we're going to look at adding 3D objects to photographs. Now you can use your own photo, but I've supplied this one as well. Let's just zoom out this so you can actually see what we're going to be using. Okay, so this is just a yard outside a country store, and what we're going to do is look at just adding a simple object in here. My final render you've seen probably has the camper van in there. Just for speed of this video, I'll just use some primitive objects, but we'll add some materials. The reason I chose this photo is because the floor is quite nice and level, so it means we can work quite quickly without having to model in kind of bumps and ridges and that sort of thing. But it is slightly tilted, so you can see how that's going to work as well. So let's dive straight into Cinema 4D, and the first thing I'm going to do is add a background object. So I'm just going to grab one of those, pop it straight in the scene. And then I want to make a new material, and this is going to be the material for the background. So this is just going to be the photo, and it's important to turn off the specular channel just because we don't want any kind of weird highlights and artifacts going on in our final render. So go to the color channel and under texture hit the drop down and just load an image. What we're going to do is go to the desktop and we'll find that photo, which is that one. We'll add that. I'm not going to copy this to the project location because I've already done this project once and saved everything, so you can decide whether you want to do that or not. Okay, so let's move that material editor out of the way, and I'm just going to right click the material and choose apply, or you can just drag and drop that, and you can see now we've got this on our background. And if I navigate the view, you can see that the view is moving but the photo is not, and that's because it's just a plain background. It might help if I just go to filter and turn on the grid so you can see what's actually going on. Okay, so that's kind of there in place. Let's just have a quick look at the background and the texture tag. We want to make sure that the projection is set to frontal, which it is. So no matter what we're looking at or whatever camera we're looking through, this is always going to be looking like this, like our original photo, which is exactly what we want. Now what I am going to do is I'm going to add a camera to the scene, and I'm going to look through the camera by clicking the look through button there. Now the view is exactly the same, because the frontal projection means that this is going to happen, so that's fine. But what we're going to use this camera for is our final render and projecting the same material onto our floor, because what we want to happen is add a plane. So let's do that. Let's add a plane, and this is going to be our floor object. I'm just going to make this one polygon, so it's just going to be one big polygon, and I'm going to stretch out the proportions just a touch and move this in just so we can see a little bit more clearly what's going on. It's just square like so. Make it big enough to cover the area you want. Now at this stage I can actually turn off the grid because we don't really need to see that grid anymore, so I'm just going to go in. That was under filter, by the way, and I can use this polygon here as my reference point. So this is going to be on my floor, but as we mentioned earlier, the floor itself is actually slightly tilted. So what I'm going to do is just go into my rotate tool, and I'm just going to rotate it just a touch to match my photo's angle that way, and possibly just a tiny bit that way as well. And I'm just using the vanishing points of the photo as reference for this, and I'm doing this by eye. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the closer you get it the better. And if for example there was a ridge in the middle of that courtyard, then you could add some extra polygons and just raise that up just slightly so that your shadows and everything and your catch lights will work properly. Now I'm going to take my texture tag from the background, and I'm going to control click and drag to dump that on the plane. Now at the moment this is going to have the same projection, so this is going to be frontal. We don't want that. We're going to have this projected through our camera. So let's go to frontal there and choose camera mapping, and we then have this field here which says camera, and I'm going to choose the camera there, and we should now find that we're going to have that material is going to be applied to this plane as well. Now at the moment it's not looking like it. Let's just go into my render settings and make sure I'm looking through everything right. I'm just going to do a quick render there. So we've got a background, and you can see that the plane isn't actually doing anything, and the reason for that is probably because we've got no lights in the scene. So I'm just going to add just a very quick light, and I'll match this up just a little bit later. But I'm going to put this over here, and I'll probably just rotate this around just until it roughly matches the direction of the sun in the photo, so it's coming from top right, and I'll just move that out of the actual way. Okay, so I've got this plane and this is my floor object, but for some reason the texture isn't showing, so I just need to make sure that the tag is doing exactly what it should. I don't need a selection. Projection camera is fine. I'm using this camera. Now let's just drop that camera view a minute and let's see what's going on. So really what I need to happen is I want that photograph to be projected onto this plane here, which is kind of the end plane of the camera. So this kind of box part in green that you can see there. Now for some reason that's not quite worked, and we should have this kind of, the photo should be kind of stretched in this triangle shape here as it reaches there, so that as you look through the camera like so, it should do exactly what you need it to do. Now there is one thing I need to do, and I need to go to the plane here, and I need to just right click that, go to Cinema 4D tags, compositing, and then turn on compositing background, and that will mean that we don't have the weirdness going on. We might have a harsh edge if we don't do that. So that's that part done. Now let's just go back into our tag, and if we go frontal again, we should see this. By all means that should be kind of on there, but it's not for some reason, and I'm not quite sure why that is. So let's go back into our camera mapping settings. That was frontal, that's right. Let's drop that tag completely and redo it using our main material. So let's select the plane, let's right click our material, apply. Okay, so I think because I control clicked and dragged it, it must have done something a bit odd. So I've just reapplied that material tag to the plane. I'm not quite sure what happened there. So I'm going to go back into the type, camera mapping, and I need to choose this camera because that's what we're going to be looking through. Don't want this to be tiling, although it probably doesn't matter hugely. Let's just do a quick render and see what that looks like. And there we go. Now, at the moment, you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, that doesn't look quite right. That's just the photo. The material is, applied to the plane in the background. How do we know that there's any 3D going on here? How do we know there's any depth? And the reason we're going to show some depth is just, let's use something very simple. Let's just use a sphere. And I'm going to knock that sphere back, and you can see now that it's actually sitting on the floor. It's sitting on that plane object. So I'm going to just increase the size actually just to really show this off. Now I've got my light already in the scene. I'll just make a nice soft white material. Let's bring the material manager back like so. I will have some reflectivity, some specular there. I'll just increase that slightly. I'm not going to worry about the reflection for now, but we will cheat that possibly afterwards. So I'm just going to apply that by right clicking the material, choosing apply, and now because we've got this light in the scene, let's just make sure that we've got some shadows. I'll just use soft shadows for now, so shadow maps, and I'm going to make the colour of the shadows a kind of dark blue-grey, which works better for outside shots, but just because the kind of ambient bounce light is generally a blue because of the colour of the sky and the air and everything around it. So that's just a little trick. Now you can play with the density if you need to afterwards, but you probably don't need to for this example. All I'm going to do is just warm up very slightly the colour of the light. So now if I just render this view, you can see that we've got our 3D going on. We've got our ground plane here, and you can tell almost that it's at a slight angle to match our photo. And we've got our sphere sitting on the floor, although it might be a tiny bit above. Okay, so this is almost working. This is almost working perfectly well. We do need to adjust the light because it's not quite matching up in the right direction. But we're almost there. Now you can also see that the plane ends here, our 3D plane, and that's cutting off the shadow. So that's another good reason to just get into our light and make sure it's doing what we want it to do. So I'm just going to move that across to match up. And probably bring it up as well. So let's raise that up, just move it back across, and I might well need to just rotate that a little as well. and really I'm doing this by eye. You probably want to spend a little bit more time than I am just messing around with this to make sure everything matches as it should. But for now I think this is fine. This is more to get the method across than make a particularly pretty render. So let's give this a go, and we'll just, in fact, I'll do a render region, but I'll make sure that we get the edge of this plane in so we can see that's working. And we'll see the same again, hoping that the sphere just meets the floor, which I think it probably does. That should be looking good by now. Here we go. Much better. Now, I would say that the shadows under the benches, which are the real object, are slightly softer and slightly bluer. So we need to adjust that. But again, there's no need for you to worry about this for this example. But I'm going to do it just for the sake of showing you how I would tweak these kind of things. So let's just do one final render. See how that looks just a bit closer to the ground. It shouldn't take too long. I'm using an older machine, so it's a little bit longer than normal, but it should be fine for these purposes. Okay, so that's looking a bit better. That's looking a bit softer, and that will match in. It probably needs a slight bit more blue just to match this shadow up here, but you'll need to match that to your photos. Now, one thing I was talking about earlier on is having a little bit of reflection in here. Now, how do we get this to reflect our photo? Now, what I'm going to do, and this is a bit of a cheat and it's not ideal, but in some situations it will get you by. I'm just going to add a sky, and then I'm going to go Cinema 4D tags, compositing, and I'm just going to uncheck scene by camera so that we can still see our background, and I'm going to add our material to it again. In fact, I might just make a duplicate. Oh, I don't need to, not for this. Ideally, if you were going to take a photo and make a background plate, knowing that that's what you were going to use the photo for, while you were there on location, it's best to shoot a panorama from where the object will be. You can make an HDRI while you're there using the chrome ball technique, using something from Homebase or a DIY store. But we'll go into that maybe in another Q&A. But for now, just if you can take a panoramic photo, even using your iPhone, that would be fine. Just to apply the image or the sky object with an image of what was around the object. So if we then give this some reflectivity, like so, let's not make it too much, and a bit of Fresnel in there as well. I'm going to blur this just a touch. Then we should be able to, with our sky hidden, that will still provide our object with something to reflect. And if you've got GI turned on, then you'll get a slight amount of the colouring from the environment showing in the lighting of your scene as well, which really does kind of help lots. So again, I'll just reiterate, this isn't the perfect way of doing it, but it can save you. And especially if you've got blurry reflections and you don't really need to see anything too clear, it will help the object just sit in there a little bit. So you can see that there's just some reflection of things going on over in the photo, and the colouring is going to match up slightly better. Works much better for the floor than anywhere else, just because you've got the bounce light coming up and helping highlight some of these areas. I'll just push the reflections a bit higher so you can see slightly more clearly what's going on. Let's just do this area in the centre again. So this is not a particularly natural material, but you can see that the colouring is right. You can tell that there's a reflection of a building, and it's actually this building over here just because it's being projected from the sky object, but it works and it does sell the effect, because as a still image you don't really know what's going on off to the sides here. For a moving image this wouldn't be ideal, and you would need the panoramic material placed on the sky, but for now I think this works perfectly well. So hopefully that's been of some help. It's a really fun technique to play around with. You can stick characters in there, all sorts, or the camper van like I used in my main render, but experiment with it, and in a future Q&A we're going to look at some other answers to questions I get on a fairly regular basis. Okay, I've been Rob Redman, see you all again soon.